When you break down the horror genre, there are many categories. You have ghost flicks, zombie flicks, psychological thrillers, slasher movies, haunted house stories, movies that are based on religion, you have the black and white era, you have the silent era, but today we'll be delving into exploitation horror, and perhaps the best example of an exploitation horror film that I could even think of is the 1978 cult classic I Spit on Your Grave. It carries the reputation of being one of the most disturbing movies as it's traumatized viewers for over the past 4 decades. Roger Ebert famously referred to it as a vile bag of garbage, and he's gone on to say that watching it in theaters was one of the worst experiences of his life. To summarize it best, I Spit on Your Grave is a revenge flick that centers on a woman being gang raped in the woods and left for dead, but she manages to survive, and once she recovers, she tracks down her rapists and kills them in very graphic ways. The depiction of this woman basically counters the stereotype of the helpless damsel in distress that we're all pretty much familiar with, and not only does this movie go against that formula, but it completely turns the tables. The woman basically turns into a slasher villain, and she picks off the men that attacked her one by one, kinda like how Freddy and Jason pick off teenagers. The movie does have sort of a forbidden reputation amongst moviegoers. Even for those who haven't actually watched it, I'm sure that the cover and the title have left an impression on a lot of people. It's funny because I Spit on Your Grave wasn't even the original title. It was originally called Day of the Woman. I must say that I'm glad that they changed it to I Spit on Your Grave because I feel like it's more appropriate, like it adds to the B-movie appeal. Like it's not trying to be anything it's not. When you look at the cover and the title, you realize you're not going to be watching the next Citizen Kane. This movie is completely in your face with its gratuitous nature. I remember years ago, long before I even watched this movie, I was having a conversation with my dad, and I casually brought up I Spit on Your Grave, and I mentioned, I might want to check that out. It looks like a good movie. To which he responded, bullshit, you just want to watch it because you like that girl's ass on the cover. Well, I have to be honest, he was not wrong. However, much to my disappointment, the woman we're looking at on the cover is not in the movie. It's a completely different actress. In fact, after doing research, I found out that the model on the cover is none other than a young Demi Moore. Well, it's definitely no wonder why it drew my attention. Anyway, the film was made in the 1970s, which has and always will be my favorite decade for horror movies. The plot involves a novelist who goes to a vacation house in a secluded area by the woods. It really is the perfect setting for this type of flick. There's a lot of tension, and the suspense does work pretty well. It leaves you feeling anxious because you know something bad is going to happen. In a lot of ways, it kind of reminds me of Deliverance, where the main character is out of their element and the residents are preying upon them. It also reminds me of Texas Chainsaw Massacre, where the bad guys are introduced in the beginning as harmless people, but later they reveal their true intentions. In this movie, the characters are absolutely vile, but one thing that astounds me is that one of the characters, named Matthew, is mentally challenged, or at least we could assume that this is the case because it really isn't established by any of the other characters. We know right off the bat that he's feeble-minded and he doesn't have the ability to think for himself, which is horrifying because the only people he has to rely on for guidance are psychopaths. He ends up delivering groceries to the main character's house, whose name is Jennifer, by the way. We can see he's obviously attracted to her. He's very shy and doesn't know how to compose himself, and she finds it cute. In return, she's kind to him and offers him friendship. While watching this scene, it made me feel sick to my stomach because, to me at least, it's obvious what's going to end up happening. It's established that this character is a virgin, and when he's having lunch with the 3 other residents who encountered Jennifer, they decide they want to embark on a mission to have Matthew lose his virginity. What ends up happening is they track down Jennifer by her vacation house, and each one of them takes a turn at raping her. The scene goes on for what feels like an eternity. It's excruciating to watch, and I will say without any exaggeration that the scene goes on for over a half an hour, probably making it the longest rape scene ever filmed. B-movie or not, that's pretty fucking hardcore for a movie this old. It's very awkward to try and explain this scene, but I'll try the best I can. Now, even though she's being gang raped, it doesn't happen all at once. What they end up doing is actually more sadistic. Each one of them takes a turn, but it's all spaced out in between. After each turn, they leave the area, which gives her a false sense of escape. So basically, they're just playing games with her. Then, when she reaches a new location, they show up again just to continue the job. It happens 3 times in a row. With each attack, they try to force Matthew to make a move on her. Despite the fact that he's mentally challenged, he clearly knows that there is something wrong with the situation. With each attempt, Matthew refuses to participate, and there's even a sad moment where he tries to help her up so she can escape, and the rapists let her go, but again, it's only so they could corner her once she makes it to her vacation house. Finally, this is the last part of the rape scene, which felt like an eternity. By the time this happens, Jennifer's in so much pain that she actually offers to give them all handjobs instead. Imagine how bad it is to where you start making offers like that. They try once more to make Matthew do the dirty deed, and this time he actually succumbs to their peer pressure. Again, I can't believe I'm actually describing this, but he gets on top of her and starts humping away. However, he's not able to finish, so they toss him aside and curse at him. The next part is unbelievably stupid. Once they're done with her, they leave the house and give Matthew the god-awful task of eliminating her. Specifically, they give him a knife and tell him to stab her in the heart. This is where the movie goes from disturbing to just being outright idiotic. It's quite clear that Matthew is the weakest link here, between the fact that he's handicapped and also the fact that he clearly has emotions for this girl. These stupid assholes are leaving him with the task of killing her, where clearly the rest of them are just as capable, and apparently none of them have the intelligence to go with him and make sure he actually does it. It really makes no sense, and it just seems like a result of crappy writing. Well, as one would expect, Matthew can't bring himself to do it, so he lies about it. Meanwhile, Jennifer starts to recover, and from there, she plans her revenge. We then cut till about 2 weeks later, where she's mostly healed from her injuries. The rest of the gang start to become worried. They still think she's dead, but they're worried that after 2 weeks in the summer heat, the body will develop a stench that will attract outside attention. So 2 of them ride their boat over to her summer house, and they immediately see her sitting by a tree staring at them like nothing happened. So they ride off and they all start beating the shit out of Matthew. Now, if you somehow manage to make it this far in the movie without shutting off your TV, then we finally reach the part that everyone's been waiting for, the revenge part. After all, what these men did to Jennifer was so horrible that we as the audience want to see her get payback, and we want it to be swift and brutal. She starts off with Matthew. She lures him out in the woods and then hangs him. But it doesn't actually start that way. She actually lets him fuck her first. How nice of her. I guess she was able to empathize with him, even though she's now blinded by rage. But if you think about it, hanging him was definitely not the worst thing she could do, which means that she didn't harbor the same hatred for him that she has for the other men. Now that Matthew is out of the way, we get to see her go after the others. She now goes after the leader of the group. This is where they really ramp up the stupidity. She shows up in front of his workplace in her car and she tells him to come over. For whatever reason, he does, and he acts very cordial with her. She then offers to give him a ride, and he actually takes it. Just trying to explain this scene is actually irritating me, and I'm not trying to be that annoying guy that we all know and hate who just nitpicks for the sake of nitpicking, but I'm sorry, this scene is just outright stupid. First of all, the entire group started panicking when they found out that Matthew didn't kill her. It's quite clear that they wanted her dead from the get-go, so why should now be any different? Also, is he that stupid that he's willing to put himself at risk by getting in her car without even letting someone know? Also, the same criticism could be made about her. She's putting herself in close proximity of a man who could physically overpower her, and not to mention someone who already wants her dead. You may ask, well, doesn't she have a gun or some kind of weapon that she's prepared to use? And the answer is yes, but of course they had to make it more convoluted. You know that really fucking obnoxious cliche where the good guy has the opportunity to kill the bad guy when the gun is in their hand with their finger on the trigger, but for whatever reason, either because they stall too much or because they decide not to go through with it, the bad guy ends up taking the gun? Well, guess what? It happens here. However, now in an odd turn of events, it appears that they're on good terms with each other. Go figure. She offers him to go back to the vacation house to take a nice sexy bath, and all of a sudden everything seems to be okay. Now, even though everything that led to this scene had me scratching my head, I will give this movie credit for one thing. What happens next in this scene is fucking brutal. Just when he thinks that everything is all right, she starts jerking him off under the water, and while his eyes are closed, she pulls out a knife with the other hand and cuts off his pecker. As a man, I will confess that this is one of the most fucked up scenes in any movie I've ever watched, and even the way it's directed is really effective. After that, she jumps out of the tub and locks him in the bathroom, leaving him to bleed to death while screaming in horror. I'll say she definitely evened the score on this one. Bravo. Then she goes after the last two guys. This is probably the worst scene out of the whole movie. She plays the role of the seductress once again, which I still don't understand, and once again, she willingly puts herself in harm's way, giving them the perfect opportunity to kill her, but again, they are stupid enough to fall into her trap. And the way she kills them is also pretty goddamn stupid. She aims her boat at one of them while holding an axe, and she swings it and actually manages to hit him without missing, probably making this one of the cheesiest deaths I've ever seen in a movie. Then the last guy starts begging for mercy while he hangs on the edge of a motor of all fucking places, which gives her the perfect opportunity to disembowel his ass. After she finishes the job, the film just abruptly ends, and it gives you no thoughts or anything to reflect on, just a cheap, simple, and abrupt ending. By the way, I just realized that this film has no soundtrack. It's kind of like The Sopranos. I don't know if it was done intentionally to make the film seem more realistic, or if they just didn't want to be bothered with hiring a score composer. To me, both answers are just as possible. When I first saw this movie, I remember feeling so depressed during the ending credits, because not only did it feel like I wasted an hour and 40 minutes of my life, but I had a sickening feeling in the pit of my stomach. It's not the type of movie I'd ever have the desire to rewatch. Roger Ebert said that when he saw this movie in theaters, there were actually men in the audience who were cheering out loud during the rape scene. They were saying things like, "Good, that'll show her." Then later, during the revenge scenes, there were women in the audience who were cheering out loud. I can only imagine the expression on his face while all this was happening. The movie clearly has a target audience, and I guess he was surrounded by them that night. There's a lot of people out in the world who have pent-up hostility, and there are also degenerates who get off on shit like rape and torture. I think you could tell a lot about a movie, as well as any work of art, based on the demographic that follows it. I have to admit, when I first saw this movie, I absolutely despised it. I thought it was one of the most disturbing movies I had ever seen in my life. It made me feel really uncomfortable, and on top of that, I hated it from a moral standpoint. But this was a long time ago, and as I've gotten older, I've learned not to take things so seriously, but I will say that the movie still fails in my eyes for two very basic reasons. The first and most obvious one is in the writing. The characters all make decisions that I don't find very plausible. I understand that when you watch a movie, you're supposed to suspend your disbelief and not take everything so seriously, but there's also such a thing as common sense, and this movie lacks it big time. The second problem I have with it is that it's lacking in substance. There doesn't seem to be any point to this movie other than to shock people, and when you look past that, there's really nothing there. Now, don't get me wrong, I don't have a problem with disturbing movies, because after all, they could still have a certain level of depth and artistic value. For example, you look at Taxi Driver and A Clockwork Orange, those movies had a ton of shock moments, but the difference is you could tell there was some intelligence behind it. I Spit on Your Grave, on the other hand, is just a vile bag of fucking garbage. I think Roger Ebert said it best. For the most part, it's just an odd, controversial piece of history that I thought was worthy of a video topic. I know that there's going to be people who will disagree with me because there are people who defend this movie. They defend it on the grounds that it conveys a sense of justice, and it seems like a lot of women defend this movie also because they find it empowering. Personally, I think in the 110-something years that they've been making movies, I think there are much better examples that accomplish that. But if you really want to go there, then I'll say this much. In terms of what the movie conveys, I don't respect it at all. If you're the type of person who makes a movie like this, then you're not trying to reach people who can use their head and think for themselves. Instead, you're trying to reach people who are angry, and you're trying to incite that anger by emotionally manipulating the audience into rooting for someone's death as if they were in the Roman Colosseum cheering out loud while someone got their head chopped off. Personally, I prefer movies that leave things to interpretation and actually allow you to think for yourself. But I know, no matter what, there's still going to be people who will disagree with me on this, and that's fine. To be honest, I don't think my stance on this movie is ever going to change. But this brings me to my next point. Does the movie have any redeeming quality? Well, for one, I do like the look of the film. It has that raw, grainy 70s look. It's not the type of thing you see in movies today. Even in the remake from 2010, I'm not a fan of how it looks. It has that gray, synthetic look that I don't really care for. I much prefer the organic look of the original. I like how the color red is really pronounced, especially in shots like this. It has that real primal, nightmare-inducing look, so I will give it credit for that. Performance-wise, the film is also pretty strong. Every actor is quite convincing with their role, including Camille Keaton. The director was apparently so fond of her that he married her shortly after the film was released. Wow, I would have gone with Demi Moore myself. There was also the remake, which was followed by 2 sequels, but I regret to say I have not seen any of them, and much to my surprise, they recently made a direct sequel to the original with the same director, and Camille Keaton reprises her role as Jennifer. The movie was released in 2019, so if you're a fan of the original, you might want to check it out. Although I may as well be frank in telling you that the movie did receive a lot of negative feedback, which seems to be a curse that will always follow this franchise. As for the original, if you're watching this review because you haven't seen the film yet, then I hope I was able to put everything in perspective for you so you could determine if you have the stomach to watch it. I don't know your taste in movies, therefore I can't predict whether you'll like it or not, but if you decide to go through with it, then watch it at your own discretion, but don't say I didn't warn you about how fucked up it is. The only reason I watched it is because I love movies, and more so than that, I love to learn about movies, and I Spit on Your Grave does have its place in history. I wouldn't want to go through life without watching it at least once to see if it lives up to its infamy, and perhaps you want to see it for the same reasons. Of course, you may also be watching it because you have seen the movie and you're looking for an objective opinion. In that case, I hope I was able to offer one that would suffice.